March 1945, somewhere over the Rhine Valley, 1,800 feet above the frozen German countryside. A Messerschmitt pilot banks his 262 into a lazy turn, scanning for bombers, when his radio crackles with laughter from his wingman. Below them, lumbering through the gray clouds like a fat goose, comes a strange twin-engine American jet, stubby, graceless, painted in dull olive green. The German's voice cuts through the static. "Look at this garbage. The Americans built a jet from spare parts and hope. It can't turn. It can't climb. Watch me send it into the trees." He throttles forward, already imagining the fireball. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed. Every week we uncover the stories the world forgot. What he didn't know was that the pilot in that garbage had already seen him, had already calculated the intercept, and was about to prove that American engineering doesn't bow to elegance. It answers with brutal, unstoppable force. The machine he mocked was the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, and it carried something the Luftwaffe hadn't counted on: 4,000 rounds of 50 caliber destruction, a top speed of 558 miles per hour at sea level, and a service ceiling that kissed 46,000 feet. Each of its 6 Browning M2 machine guns spat lead at 800 rounds per minute, creating a convergence zone at 300 yards, where the cone of fire turned aircraft into confetti. The engine, a General Electric I-40 centrifugal flow turbojet, gulped air and screamed 4,000 pounds of thrust, enough to hurl 10,000 pounds of steel and pilot into the stratosphere faster than anything Germany had imagined America could build. The P-80's fuel capacity stretched to 425 gallons internally, with provisions for wingtip tanks that pushed its range past 1,200 miles. It wasn't graceful. It didn't need to be. It was a sledgehammer wrapped in aluminum, and it had arrived to crack open the myth of German jet supremacy. But the road to that moment over the Rhine wasn't clean. In the summer of 1944, test pilot Milo Burcham climbed into the third XP-80 prototype at Murat Dry Lake and felt the new engine shudder beneath him. The I-40 was temperamental, prone to compressor stalls, and the airframe, rushed from drawing board to flight in just 143 days, had quirks no manual could cover. On August 6th, Burcham's engine flamed out at 20,000 feet. He rode the jet down in silence, dead stick, wheels kissing the lakebed with inches to spare. The engineers watched, pale and sweating. 2 months later, Burcham wasn't so lucky. On October 20th, the engine failed again, this time low and fast. The P-80 augured in. Burcham died in the fireball. The program could have died with him. Instead, the accident reports became doctrine. Pilots learned to nurse the throttle, to anticipate the compressor's moods, to keep speed in reserve. A Lockheed engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson, already a legend for the P-38, gathered his team in a sweltering Burbank hangar and laid down the law. Fly it like you're carrying nitroglycerin. Smooth inputs. No yanking. The jet doesn't forgive ham-fisted cowboys. That became the P-80 creed. Energy management. Altitude equals life. Never turn when you can extend. Never extend when you can dive. The men who survived the training pipeline absorbed it like gospel. By February 1945, the first operational P-80s, 12 aircraft assigned to the 412th Fighter Group, arrived in Italy. The pilots were young. Most had flown P-38s or P-47s, and they looked at the shooting star with the wary respect mechanics reserve for chainsaws. The jet sat low on tricycle gear, its nose stretched forward like a predator's snout, engine intake gaping beneath the cockpit. On the ground it looked almost fragile. In the air it was a different animal. Lieutenant Colonel William Council took the first combat-ready bird up on a cold morning, climbing through 10,000 feet in under 3 minutes, and radioed back a single sentence. "Gentlemen, we just started a new war." The first vignette came on March 19, 1945, near the town of Koblenz. Captain Robert Preston, call sign gunner, was flying top cover for a squadron of P-47s, hammering a rail yard when his wingman called out 2 contacts, high and fast, contrails scratching the sky at 28,000 feet. Preston pushed the throttle to the stop, felt the P-80 leap forward like a kick mule, and began the climb. The altimeter unwound in reverse. 18,000, 22,000, 26,000, his oxygen mask fogging with each breath. At 30,000 feet, he broke through a cloud deck and found himself face-to-face with a Messerschmitt Me-262, close enough to see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. The Germans saw him too. For a frozen second, they stared at each other, two jets on the edge of history. Then the 262 broke left, hard, afterburners glowing orange in the thin air. Preston didn't follow the turn. He rolled inverted, pulled the nose down and dove, trading altitude for speed, exactly as Kelly Johnson had preached. The airspeed indicator climbed past 500, past 520, the controls stiffening as the P-80 plunged through 20,000 feet. Preston leveled out, scanning the sky, and found the 262 below him now, arcing through a climbing turn, hemorrhaging energy. Preston nosed over again, throttle wide open, and the distance collapsed. At 400 yards, he squeezed the trigger. The 650s roared, a jackhammer drumbeat that shook the airframe. Tracers converged, walked up the 262's wing route, and tore into the fuselage. The German jet pitched over, trailing smoke, and spun into the hills below Koblenz. Preston didn't celebrate. He just clicked his radio and said, "Splash 1, returning to base." It was the first American jet kill of the war, and it announced something the Luftwaffe hadn't prepared for. The Americans had closed the technology gap and brought the numbers to bury them. The second vignette unfolded a week later, on March 26th, over the Autobahn near Frankfurt. For P-80s from the 412th, led by Major John Meyer, a triple ace with 24 kills in P-51s, swept low over German territory, hunting for targets of opportunity. They found a convoy, 6 trucks, 2 half-racks, and a Panther tank crawling west toward the shrinking Reich. Meyer called the attack, and the 4 jets rolled in line astern, screaming down from 8,000 feet at 450 miles per hour. The 50s opened up at 600 yards, each jet laying a river of tracers across the roadway. The trucks exploded, tires shredding, fuel tanks erupting in orange fireballs. The half-racks tried to scatter, but the second and third P-80s caught them in the crossfire, armor-piercing rounds punching through thin steel like tissue paper. The Panther tried to return fire, turret swinging, but the jets were already past, pulling up in a chandelle, gone before the 75mm gun could track. They came around for a second pass. This time Meyer targeted the tank's engine deck. The convergence zone, 6 streams of 50 caliber fire meeting at 300 yards, turned the Panther's rear into a sieve. Smoke poured from the grills. The crew bailed, sprinting into the tree line. A Wehrmacht sergeant, captured 2 days later near Mannheim, told his interrogators, "We heard the sound first, like tearing canvas, but deeper, faster. We looked up and saw 4 aircraft, no propellers, just speed and fire. By the time we understood what we were seeing, half the convoy was gone. We had been told the Americans were soft, that their machines were crude. That was a lie. Those jets were hunting us, and we were just meat." But the P-80 wasn't done evolving. In April 1945, Lockheed engineers introduced the P-80A-1 variant, equipped with an upgraded I-40G-11 engine pushing 4,600 pounds of thrust and a new K-14 gyroscopic gun sight, the same system used in late-model P-51s and P-47s, capable of computing lead and deflection automatically. The sight transformed gunnery. Pilots no longer needed to guess angles. They put the pipper on the target, squeezed the trigger, and let physics do the rest. The new engine also changed the jet's voice. The earlier I-40 produced a high, whistling shriek. The G-11 roared a deeper, angrier note that mechanics nicknamed the Banshee. When a flight of 4 P-80A-1s launched from Lesina airfield in Italy, the sound rolled across the Adriatic like thunder, rattling windows in coastal villages 5 miles away. The performance gains were immediate. Climb rate improved to 4,500 feet per minute. Ceiling pushed past 47,000 feet. And the new engine was smoother, less prone to flameouts, more forgiving of ham-fisted throttle work. The P-80 had gone from experimental weapon to operational hammer. Range became the next problem to solve. The Shooting Star's internal fuel gave it roughly 540 miles of combat radius, enough for local air superiority missions, not enough to escort bombers deep into Germany or chase fleeing Luftwaffe units east toward Czechoslovakia. Lockheed's answer was the 165-gallon wingtip tank, a sleek teardrop nacelle that bolted directly to each wingtip and extended range by 400 miles without significantly degrading performance. The tanks were jettisonable, allowing pilots to drop them in combat and regain full maneuverability. By late April, every operational P-80 carried them as standard. The effect was immediate. Suddenly, American jets could loiter over targets for extended periods, could chase German aircraft fleeing toward Prague or Munich, could range across southern Germany with impunity. The Luftwaffe, already bleeding pilots and fuel, found itself with no sanctuary. A Focke-Wulf 190 pilot, interrogated after bailing out near Regensburg on April 28, summed it up bitterly. "We used to count on distance. If we could break contact and run, we could survive to the next mission. But now the American jets follow us home. They wait above our airfields. They are always there, and we cannot escape them." The P-80's role expanded beyond air superiority. With the Luftwaffe in its death spiral, the jets turned to ground attack, strafing convoys, rail yards, bridges, anything that moved or supported what remained of the Wehrmacht. The 650s, loaded with a mix of ball, armor-piercing, and incendiary rounds, shredded locomotives, blew apart ammunition dumps, set fuel depots ablaze. The pilots flew low and fast, hugging terrain, popping up to attack, gone before flak gunners could react. A typical mission log from April 1945 reads like a butcher's tally. 0900 hours, strafed rail junction at Nuremberg, destroyed 2 locomotives, 16 boxcars. 0930 hours, engaged convoy southwest of Bamberg, destroyed 4 trucks, 1 command car, scattered infantry. 1015 hours, returned to base, refueled, rearmed. 1130 hours, launched again. The tempo was relentless. The P-80 pilots flew 3, sometimes 4 sorties a day, and the German survivors reported a growing sense of helplessness. A captured logistics officer told Allied intelligence, "We moved only at night. Even then, we heard them. The jets, always the jets. They hunted us like wolves." As the Reich collapsed, whispers began filtering back through prisoner interrogations and captured documents. German engineers, who had worked on the Me-262 program, were stunned by the P-80's development speed. The 262 had taken years, had suffered delays, engine failures, political meddling. The Americans had gone from concept to operational deployment in 18 months. A Messerschmitt engineer, interviewed by U.S. technical intelligence officers in May 1945, admitted, "We believed we had a 2-year technological lead. We were wrong. The P-80 is simpler, more reliable, easier to maintain. We built a thoroughbred. You built a workhorse. In war, the workhorse wins." Luftwaffe pilots, those few still alive, expressed a grudging, exhausted respect. One ace, credited with 47 kills, captured near Munich, said quietly, "The 262 was faster, could outturn the P-80 in some configurations. But for every 262 we launched, you had 5 P-80s waiting, and your pilots had fuel, and training, and no fear. We were fighting ghosts by the end." But even ghosts need steel. The American industrial machine didn't just produce P-80s, it vomited them. Lockheed's Burbank facility, running 3 shifts around the clock, rolled out the jets at a pace that defied comprehension. By April 1945, the plant was completing 5 P-80s per day. 5. Each airframe required 18,000 rivets, 4,200 feet of wiring, 87 separate hydraulic fittings, and a turbojet engine assembled from 3,800 precision parts. The workers, many of them women, many pulled from farms and factories across California, operated with assembly line precision honed over years of wartime production. A single P-80 moved through 14 stations: fuselage mating, wing attachment, engine installation, fuel system integration, hydraulics, electrical, armament, final inspection. The average build time, 3,200 man-hours, down from 5,400 hours for early prototypes. The Burbank plant consumed 240 tons of aluminum per week, 18,000 gallons of hydraulic fluid per month, 60,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition for test firing the guns on every completed aircraft. General Electric's Lynn, Massachusetts facility, meanwhile, churned out I-40 engines, 12 per day by war's end, each one test run for 40 hours before shipping. The logistics were staggering. Completed P-80s were flown from Burbank to Newark, then loaded onto freighters bound for Naples, then trucked overland to airfields in northern Italy. The entire pipeline, factory floor to combat sortie, took 19 days. 19. The Germans, by contrast, were cannibalizing Me-262s for spare parts, pulling engines from crashed aircraft, flying jets with mismatched components and prayers. A comparison. In April 1945 alone, Lockheed delivered 147 P-80s. Germany managed to put 61 Me-262s in the air that month and lost 54 of them. The math was extinction, part 2. The P-80's most critical test came in the war's final weeks, when it faced Germany's last desperate gambit, the jet and rocket fighters that were supposed to turn the tide. The Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, a rocket-powered interceptor capable of 596 miles per hour, had terrorized bomber formations in late 1944, climbing to 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes, slashing through B-17 boxes, then gliding back to Earth on fumes. The Me-262, meanwhile, remained lethal in experienced hands, faster than anything propeller-driven, armed with 430mm cannons that could saw a bomber in half. But both aircraft had fatal vulnerabilities, and the P-80 pilots learned to exploit them with surgical precision. The Me-163's rocket motor burned for only 8 minutes, after which the Comet became a glider, fast, maneuverable, but defenseless. P-80 pilots began loitering near known Comet bases, waiting at altitude, watching for the telltale white contrail of the rocket's ascent. When the Me-163 pilot exhausted his fuel and began to glide home, the P-80's dove. The Comet could turn, but it couldn't run. On April 14, 1945, Captain James Tanner caught a Me-163 in a descending spiral above Bad Zwischenahn airfield. The German pilot tried every trick, barrel rolls, split S, a desperate climb that bled off speed, but Tanner stayed patient, matching every move, waiting for the mistake. It came at 8,000 feet. The Comet pilot pulled too hard, stalled, and dropped a wing. Tanner closed to 200 yards and opened fire. The 50 caliber rounds walked up the fuselage, shattered the canopy, and the Me-163 tumbled into a forest north of the airfield. Tanner's radio transmission was clinical. Comet down. No shoot. Returning to station. The Me-262 required a different approach. In level flight, the German jet was faster, 515 miles per hour, versus the P-80's 505 at altitude. But the 262's Jumo 004 engines were fragile, prone to flameouts, and slow to spool up from idle. P-80 pilots exploited the lag. They baited 262's into turning fights, forcing the German pilots to chop throttle, then pounced when the Jumos struggled to accelerate. On April 19th, near Leipzig, Lieutenant Charles Fisher engaged 2 Me-262s, escorting a flight of Arado reconnaissance planes. The 262 split, one high, one low, classic Luftwaffe tactics. Fisher ignored the high aircraft and dove on the low one, closing fast. The German pilot saw him coming, broke hard left, and pulled the throttles back to tighten the turn. Fisher followed through the initial brake, then extended, pushing the P-80's nose down, trading altitude for speed, opening the distance to 800 yards. The 262 pilot, realizing his mistake, slammed the throttles forward. The Jumos hesitated, coughed, spooled up slowly. Fisher had already reversed, coming back around a shallow climb, speed still high. He caught the 262 in profile, wings level, engines still accelerating. The convergence zone enveloped the German jet. The right engine exploded first, turbine blades shredding the nacelle. The 262 rolled inverted and went straight in. Fisher's wingman, Lieutenant Donald Murray, took the second 262 in a head-on pass, both jets screaming toward each other at a combined closure rate of over 1,000 miles per hour. Murray opened fire at 600 yards, walked the tracers forward, and broke left at the last instant. The 262 pilot tried to brake right, but caught a burst in the cockpit. The jet nosed over and augured into a field south of Leipzig, cartwheeling through a line of trees. Murray's after-action report noted, almost offhandedly, enemy pilot displayed good situational awareness, but poor energy management. Jet destroyed. Proceeding to secondary target. The Luftwaffe's elite, the surviving aces, the men with 50, 80, 100 kills, began writing their own epitaphs in diaries and letters home. Major Heinz Barr, who flew both the Me-262 and late-model FW-190s, wrote in early April, "The Americans have learned. They no longer chase U.S. in turns. They use altitude, patience, numbers. For every kill we achieve, we lose 2 aircraft. The mathematics are final." Another pilot, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, captured near Salzburg in May, told his interrogators, "In 1943, we feared the Mustangs. In 1944, we feared the numbers. In 1945, we feared the American jets. Not because they were better aircraft. Ours were faster, more heavily armed, but because they were everywhere, flown by pilots who had fuel to train, ammunition to practice, and the certainty that if they were shot down, another jet would take their place within hours. We had no replacements. We had no fuel. We had no hope." The captured documents told the same story. Luftwaffe maintenance logs from April 1945 recorded Me-262 serviceability rates below 30%. Of the roughly 200 jets theoretically available, fewer than 60 could fly on any given day. Spare parts were scavenged from wrecks. Pilots flew with mismatched engines, faulty radios, compromised weapons. A technical report from JG-7, the Luftwaffe's premier jet fighter wing, lamented, "Operational readiness continues to decline. Fuel reserves, 3 days. Ammunition, sufficient for 12 sorties. Pilot strength, 19. Morale, non-existent." Meanwhile, the Americans were landing fresh P-80s daily, each one fueled, armed, and crewed by pilots averaging 300 hours in type. The final operational proof came during Operation Talisman, launched on April 28, 1945. 12 P-80s from the 412th Fighter Group swept across southern Bavaria, targeting the last Luftwaffe airfields still launching jets. The mission brief was simple: destroy everything that moves, suppress everything that doesn't. The jets hit Neuburg Airfield first, catching 4 Me-262s, taxiing for takeoff. The P-80s came in low, 50 feet above the runway, and shredded the German jets before they could spool engines. Fuel bozers exploded, hangars collapsed under 50 caliber fire, and the control tower disintegrated in a hail of tracers. The flight moved to Lithium next, found 3 more 262s in revetments, and turned them into burning skeletons. At Lechfeld, they caught a mixed group, 2 Me-262s, a handful of FW-190s, 1 ancient Ju-88, and destroyed them all in a single strafing pass. Total time over target, 40 minutes. Aircraft destroyed, 14. P-80 losses, 0. A German ground crew chief, pulled from the rubble at Neuburg, told intelligence officers, "We heard the jets coming. We always heard them now. We tried to scatter the aircraft, to hide them in the trees, but it didn't matter. They found everything. They destroyed everything. And then they left, and we knew they would be back tomorrow, and the day after, until there was nothing left to destroy." The operation wasn't just a tactical success. It was a psychological guillotine, severing the Luftwaffe's last illusion that they could fight back. The numbers, when compiled after Germany's surrender, told a story of industrial annihilation. Between March and May 1945, the 412th Fighter Group's P-80s flew 214 combat sorties, logged 318 combat hours, and claimed 37 confirmed kills, 23 in the air, 14 on the ground. They lost 2 aircraft, both to mechanical failure, neither to enemy action. The kill ratio, 18.5 to 1, dwarfed even the vaunted Mustang's performance. But the deeper statistics revealed the true dominance. American factories produced 563 P-80s before VE Day. Only 45 saw combat. The rest sat in depots, waiting. Germany fielded roughly 1,400 Me-262s total over the entire war, and lost 1,000 of them. The Americans could replace every P-80 loss within 48 hours. The Germans couldn't replace pilots, fuel, or hope. The USAF flew 16,800 jet sorties in the war's final months, most of them by P-47s and P-51s, but 600 by P-80s. The Luftwaffe managed 3,400 jet sorties total, and most ended in aircraft destroyed on landing due to fuel exhaustion or damage. The ammunition expenditure told its own story. P-80 pilots fired 4.3 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition in 3 months. German jets, rationing every cartridge, fired less than 800,000 rounds of cannon ammunition in the same period. The fuel comparison was even starker. The USAF moved 14 million gallons of aviation gasoline to European airfields in April 1945 alone. The Luftwaffe had 60,000 gallons remaining across all of Germany. 60,000. Enough for perhaps 200 sorties. The training hours completed the picture. The average P-80 pilot entered combat with 320 hours total flight time, 85 hours in type, and live-fire gunnery training. The average Luftwaffe jet pilot in April 1945 had 140 hours total, 12 hours in type, and had never fired his guns in training. The mathematics were genocide. Nor did the P-80's impact end with air combat. The jet's ground attack sorties in the war's final weeks crippled what remained of German logistics. The pilots targeted rail junctions, bridges, fuel depots, ammunition dumps, anything that kept the Wehrmacht moving. A single 4-ship flight, armed with 50 caliber API rounds, could destroy a locomotive, shred a rail line, and set a fuel dump ablaze in under 90 seconds. The cumulative effect was paralysis. By late April, German units reported critical shortages of everything: ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies. A Wehrmacht division commander, captured near Munich on May 2nd, explained, "We could not move by day. The American jets owned the sky. We moved at night, on secondary roads, through forests. But even then, they found us. They had radar. They had flares. They had patience. We lost more vehicles to air attack in April than we had lost in the previous 6 months combined. The war was over. We simply had not yet surrendered." The P-80 pilots, many of them barely old enough to vote, became executioners of the Third Reich's logistical spine, flying 4 and 5 sorties a day, returning to base with gun barrels smoking, wings and fuselage spattered with oil and hydraulic fluid from targets destroyed at point-blank range. The respect, grudging, bitter, exhausted, came through in the captured documents and post-war interviews. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, interrogated by Allied intelligence officers in May 1945, admitted, "The Me-262 was a technological triumph. But technology alone does not win wars. You Americans had the industrial base, the fuel, the pilots, the training, the numbers. You built a jet in less time than it took us to approve a design change. You produced them faster than we could shoot them down. And you flew them with a confidence we could no longer muster. The P-80 was not the best jet in the sky, but it was good enough, and you had hundreds of them. That was the difference." A Luftwaffe technical officer, reviewing captured P-80 wreckage at a forward intelligence site, wrote, "The construction is straightforward, almost crude compared to our standards. But it is robust, easily maintained, designed for mass production. The Americans understand something we forgot. Perfection is the enemy of production. They did not build the perfect jet. They built the jet they could build 10,000 times. That is why they won." The diaries of German pilots, those who survived, echoed the same themes. One entry, dated April 22, 1945, reads, "Saw 6 American jets today. They did not engage. They simply flew overhead, in formation, as if to remind us they were there, as if to say, 'We own this sky, and there is nothing you can do about it.' They were right." But the most haunting acknowledgement came from a Messerschmitt engineer named Wilhelm Messerschmitt himself, interviewed by American technical intelligence teams in June 1945. He sat in a small office, chain-smoking, staring at photographs of a captured P-80, and said quietly, "We laughed at the American jets when we first saw reconnaissance photos. We said they looked like training aircraft, like toys. We were fools. You built a weapon system, not just an aircraft, but a system. Production, logistics, training, tactics, all integrated. We built individual masterpieces and starved them of fuel and pilots. Your P-80 terrified our scientists not because it was elegant, but because it was inevitable. You could build them faster than we could think. That is genius of a kind we never understood." The war ended on May 8, 1945. The P-80s flew their last combat sorties on May 7th, patrol missions over Bavaria, more symbolic than operational, the aerial equivalent of a victory lap. The jets returned to Lesina airfield in Italy, taxied to their revetments, engines winding down with that distinctive banshee howl, and the pilots climbed out into the late afternoon sun. There were no celebrations, no champagne, just exhaustion, relief, and the quiet knowledge that they had written a chapter in aviation history. The ground crew swarmed the jets, checking for damage, refueling, rearming, old habits dying hard. One crew chief, a sergeant from Ohio named Tom Briggs, ran his hand along the nose of a P-80 that had flown 67 combat sorties without an abort, and muttered, "You ugly, beautiful bastard. You brought them all home." Today, a P-80 shooting star sits on the polished floor of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., roped off from the crowds, spotlights gleaming on the olive drab paint and the faded white star on the fuselage. Children pressed their faces against the barrier, parents read the placard aloud, and tour guides explain how this stubby jet helped end the war. The aircraft is static, silent, a relic. But if you stand close enough, if the museum is quiet enough, you can almost hear the echo of that Messerschmitt pilot's voice from March 1945, crackling through the radio static. "Look at this garbage." And then you remember what happened next, the convergence zone, the falling contrails, the burning wreckage in the Rhine Valley, and you understand that the Americans didn't build elegance. They built thunder. They built inevitability. They built the storm that swept the Luftwaffe from the sky and claimed it, forever, as their own. If you love untold stories from history's darkest hours, subscribe and join us on the next mission through time.